So what is the role of a fractional CMO? I'm willing to bet that you have a definition in your mind. It may not be accurate. Karen McFarlane is a seasonal FCMO. She's also the president of the American Marketing Association New York chapter, one of the biggest chapters in the country. And Karen is just a boss. She has led marketing at every level, from HBO all the way to the top to smaller early stage startups, and advised all phases of their marketing strategies and campaigns. Today, Karen is going to teach you and I what it really looks like to lead as an FCMO, why it is glamorous, why it is not, and why it's really just a job of communication, delegation, and team management. How to manage teams that are sometimes jumbled, improve communication, and keep high standards. And a few simple mindset shifts that have made her a more inclusive leader for all teams. Again, a huge thank you to our friends over at AMA Columbus for being our presenting sponsors of this podcast and every episode of Marketing by Design. And if you're new here, welcome. My name is Andy Milligan. I am the founder of MMG Design and the host of Marketing by Design, where we talk to marketers, founders, and business leaders. All the links to our partners and resources will be down below. Make sure you check those out. Without further ado, let's dive on in. Please welcome Karen McFarlane to the show. What does a normal kind of Monday in the life look like for a fractional CMO?
I guess it's really just assessing what needs to be accomplished that week. It depends on the client and what their needs are. I would summarize my clients in like 3 buckets, I guess. So first would be maybe something along the lines of startups, right? Who need to jumpstart their marketing. They don't have it. They don't have a team fully in place yet. And that's really a soup to nuts situation. The second group would be like medium-sized businesses. They perhaps have a small team or maybe a relatively inexperienced team, and they need a fractional CMO to come in and form strategy and lead that team. And then the third would be enterprises who probably have a full-scale team, but they might not have the bandwidth or a specific expertise to, say, launch a new product or take on a special initiative. And then within that, there's different personalities of different companies, right? So I would label them as either low, medium, or high effort, for example. You know, high effort is, you know,
Sound like, sorry, not to cut you off. You sound like my mom talking about me and my brothers and sisters. So
exactly.
that's how she was this. Yeah.
Basically the whole thing, you know.
That's the
It's
analogy.
depending on the attention they need. At the end of the day, that's really what it is. And that's how I might start my Monday. That's how much attention they need.
Okay. Cool. That makes it easier to explain, but continue.
Yeah. No. I mean, that's basically it. Low, medium, high effort is really about attention, or it could be attention of the client or attention of whatever project or initiative that is going on that week. I'm very deadline oriented. So if there's a deadline, then that gets the most attention.
Yeah. It's almost hilarious how we sometimes have to treat ourselves like children and say this is, put ourselves back in that school mindset of this is when this has to be done by, because things will always fall to the back burner. And I've learned that just in one full year being, full-time doing my own thing, is that you have got to hold yourself accountable to that sometimes. And it also looks like holding others accountable, as well, and saying, this is when this is going to get done by, scheduling the meeting right afterwards. So that makes a lot of sense to me, but
yeah, well, I'm better at, in terms of accountability, so my own personal stuff, I'm very bad at holding myself accountable with. Because I can move the goalposts all day long. But if it's somebody else's stuff, it will get done, and it will get done on time. And I've always been this way. I just had to accept it as I got older. Like, everyone says, oh, you should do things in chunks and take your time. And I do my best work under pressure. So if I have a deadline and it's for somebody else, it could be for a client or it could be for a friend. But if it's for somebody else, fully accountable. But if it's mine,
this is true. Yes, this is true. And I think that's a really good segue, because I wanted to know, like, if you can be self-aware for a minute and say like, this is why, being fractional or split up between, a few different roles fits me very well. You seem like someone who can task switch very well, who prefers the flavor of maybe dipping in a few different projects and learning from each of them. Um, if someone wants to create that self-awareness and say like, okay, is taking on multiple clients and sort of spreading myself across that. I know I've heard some people say that maybe it could be spreading themselves too thin. They need a singular focus. How did you kind of know that having multiple areas and buckets was the thing for you?
I think kind of by accident when I first started, say consulting. So I kind of graduated into the fractional role. I,
Hmm.
I was a fractional before it was even a term, right? But
Yeah.
I was in regular corporate America, and it was fine. It's what I knew. It was like my first job was at HBO, and that was the job that I knew.
Nice.
And then I moved over to a new startup. It was one of the very first like social networks. It was social network for teens. It was called Bolt
Hmm.
at the time, but it was a
Okay.
very different environment. It was corporate America. You have your offices, your cubicles, your desks. There's a certain structure to that. At this company, we were basically in, I don't know, a big loft, and it was set up like rows of desks, like in classrooms, but huge.
Hmm.
And it was a very different culture, and it wasn't something that I loved at all,
Hmm.
right? And I
Yeah.
actually left after 3 months, and I left without a job or anything. I just was miserable in that environment. And I was floating for a little while, pursuing some of my other side interests around music and production and things of that nature. But
Hmm.
then I got my first consulting role.
Hmm.
And, it was meant to be a short-term role. And then I got my second consulting role. And then I got my
Hmm.
third. And what it taught me is that I had to be on point all the time. With every new engagement, I learned something new that I could
Hmm.
actually apply to the next gig. Also,
Hmm.
because I was a consultant, I was brought in as an expert, right? And so I had to be an expert,
Hmm.
which meant
Yeah.
leveling up, learning the industry and kind of figuring out what practices I could recycle, right? So I could level up faster, but also be effective. And so over time, when I say time, it's actually a really short period of time because when you,
Hmm.
you move around, you don't have time to like, let me sit here for 6 months and figure out the business. No,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
have to keep it moving really fast. And I realized I like that, right? So it was
Hmm.
really by accident through experimentation, right?
Hmm.
That I liked this fast paced movement, but I also liked being an expert. And I thrived in the process of doing that. And also just going back to what we just said, because I'm deadline driven and in some ways last minute, right?
Hmm.
That ability to turn on that part of your brain to get stuff done actually worked well in this type of environment.
Mm. Yeah,
So
I love. Yeah. So let's unpack that. So when you say you got these first couple roles, zooming in a little bit,
mhm.
when you got these first couple roles at these organizations, these startups, what did that consulting scope look like for you specifically? I think a lot of people get into they sort of grow into a more of a consulting role, if that makes sense. They usually start in marketing. They have one specific deliverable or one niche that they've started in, whether they're designers, whether they're email strategists, something that's more specific, and then they get in with the company, and then they sort of become the okay, yeah, marketing, you can do all these things. Did that start something similar like that to you, where you had maybe a skill set or expertise, or were you always just sort of full stack marketing consultant? I'm here to put together a full strategy for you guys.
So my first consulting roles were through a third party agency that sourced those roles. And
Mm-hmm.
they actually weren't for startups. They were for, I don't know if you remember Prodigy Internet was one of them. DoubleClick was
Okay.
another, right? Um, and so they were looking for now that you asked me this question, this is probably how I became a fractional. They might have been looking for a particular set of expertise, like say product marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or for DoubleClick, I was brought in to launch a new research brand that they were starting up. And so I came in that regard and was embedded into the team. And I think it probably, as I think about it now, and it was brought in as a consultant, but it was probably more like a contractor role in a sense. It probably felt more like that. But was interesting is, again, there's this, I'm going to say, perceived expertise that I had. I'm saying perceived because at the time, I probably didn't think I had all that much, but I had this ability to learn, synthesize information, and put things together, which I didn't value as much when I was younger, right? That I do now. And I think that's really how I got my first roles. I didn't actually have to source them; they were given to me through the agency, and I just kept working through that agency because of my deliverables, right? And some of those roles, I was there for a longer period of time than what was initially contracted because of whatever circumstances there were. They liked my work or, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think that's, I think that helps a lot to kind of clarify for people because I mean, I've even seen it myself. I think so much of it is you make a relationship with a company or organization, and a lot of times you establish your credibility on the job. And it also brings up the opportunity to present, more solutions to them as their business grows, as they evolve, and if they enjoy working with you, then conveniently you're the one that's already there to solve their problems.
Exactly.
Yeah, and sort of unpacking the relationship side of things, I think that's so huge in what we do. And even I have just seen it as well, just getting started and trying to meet other people, seeing where these different avenues can take you in marketing because it's just so big. And I think a lot of people sort of my age get the deer in headlights situation where they feel like, okay, I need to engineer like my actions in such a very specific, curated way, and they're not as open to what these relationships, what these organizations, things that they have been a part of, or the job opportunities that come across their own radar. They're not open to as many of them as they maybe would have been because maybe it roots back to their preconceived notions of themselves. And so, like, I really encourage people to just be open to saying yes, especially in the beginning, to the opportunities that a company might present, because they could evolve and expand into something that ends up taking you on a path that could be the thing for you. So,
I agree with that. I had this year of saying yes to, I would say, almost anything that came across my path. And it did open up a lot of opportunities, but it also didn't allow me to balance my time properly. So then after my year of saying yes, I had a year of saying yes, but not yet, right? But that was only from saying yes to understand more about myself, the opportunities that were presented to me, and then trying to figure out how to self-evaluate those opportunities to align with where I wanted to go in the future. But you also have to be open because you can't have a very narrow view of your future. It has to have a wider aperture because you have to be willing to experiment with some things you may not have thought of, right? And engage with people that you may normally not have if you didn't open up the aperture a little bit. So it's about, being flexible in those relationships and those opportunities along the way, but also establishing some guideposts and a North Star, as well as some boundaries. But that you learn with time as you get to know yourself, particularly as you're starting out in your career.
Yeah. What are some of those North Stars for you? What would you say?
I kind of think about it as establishing my personal brand and how that extends into the business. So it's really about what you want people to say about you when you're not in the room, also how they describe you. So what I want people, they might not use these words, but I think about it as having integrity, like I do what I say and I say what I mean. Equity is a real cornerstone for me. So just building a system or a space where everybody has a voice.
Hmm.
Impact is important to me, so I want to choose work that makes a difference. And also just excellence. Like I want to be known for excellence and that I hold a high standard for myself, for the people that work with me, and for the people who work around me. But I also lead with empathy. So those are part of my personal core values, my personal
Hmm.
brand, and that's what I want to extend out through anything that I touch.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And this is really top of mind for me, sort of, as I learned from more professionals that have had more time in the industry and they've built careers, is I think branding, when it comes down to it, is really associations. What you choose to identify, like the words you use across your social media, the words that you say and live up to. And it's important that, you sort of you are self-aware enough to know what those are, but also stick with them long enough to make sure that they resonate. Um, and I think when you build a career and you look back at what you've accomplished and all the places you've been, the places you've worked, the people you've met, those are the things that you can only really see kind of in reflection. It's like, oh,
Hmm.
like I became known for this, that, and the other. And it's very hard to engineer into the future. Like I want to be known as a person. That's why it's so hard to sometimes pick a niche, is that you don't know how what you say resonates. Sometimes you don't know where it's going to lead you. Um, and that's why I think it's so important to have a little bit of self-awareness around what you're trying to build, but not being so rigid in the exact wording of it to maybe where it shuts you off from some of these opportunities, that we talked about. So,
Yeah,
um,
it's hard to do that, and it took me a long time to figure that out. And even I'll still massage it to some degree, right? It's not set in stone. There are things I wished I figured out sooner, and I could have had I had the confidence to think of myself in those very positive ways. But when you are starting your career, um, you're some people may feel confident, but most people don't. They have imposter syndrome or whatever phrase you want to call it. It's very real. You question
mhm,
who you are and where you want to be, and you're growing into that. But there are things that you know about yourself, and you should focus on those strengths. I was given a book. It was called Know Your Strength, something like that. Strength. It was a Strengths Finder,
mhm,
and I did that. I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. I don't remember what it was, but what it did was, for whatever reason, this book resonated with me, and it highlighted my core strengths at the time that I knew to be true, right? I needed to name them, but
mhm,
also it gave me permission to just focus on what I'm good at and don't worry about what I'm not good at, because there's
mhm,
often a lot of advice that you get, which is, oh, you need to shore up your weaknesses. I think you need to know what they are for sure,
mhm,
and then surround yourself with people who are strong in those areas and work together with them,
mhm,
because you can't be good at everything. So focus on the things that you're really good at and lean into them. And
mhm,
that gave me permission to do that. For, these words just were magical in my mind.
mhm.
Right? And
Yeah.
I did. And then I forgot about them for a while. And then I had to return back, right? And just
Mhm,
really integrate them with my own words, right? So that I
mhm,
could remember them and internalize them.
mhm.
So it's
Yeah,
there for most
good.
people.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think so many people, especially when they're trying to build a career in marketing, they have that imposter syndrome. And it goes so in tandem. And I can say it as someone who worked both in a professional environment and freelancing and trying to build your own business, is that it doesn't go away. It just takes different, uh, it colors itself in different ways. So when you're meeting with clients, you feel the imposter syndrome around having to be the key decision maker. Or when you're at an organization, it looks like being anxious around presenting your unique ideas in front of
Mhm.
stakeholders, bosses, superiors, etc. So if you could give like a 30-second pep talk to someone who's maybe a little bit younger and struggling to, find their voice a little bit, what would you say to them based on some of your past experiences that may help them out?
I mean, it's really, don't be afraid to use your voice, right? You have good ideas. You should share them. You're there for a reason. You're hired for a reason, whether it's full-time, part-time, freelance, whatever. And the expectation is that you bring your thoughts to the table. And if you're not doing that, you're only doing them and yourself a disservice. Your voice is always worth something. You might have a great idea, you may have a bad idea. Doesn't really matter, right? Those ideas can form into something new, right? Or spark your thinking in a different way, and you can always come back to that. So no matter what, right? You just remember, for the very first thing that I said is, you are there, you are hired for a reason. So show up and use your voice.
Awesome. Have any of the, and I want to sort of transition to um, networking and the AMA. Like, how have you had any experiences with meeting people there that have maybe steered your career in a positive way and maybe given you a pep talk, maybe just like the one you just gave me, um, and that have been, sort of that asset for you in your career?
Yeah, but not in the way that I initially expected. So,
Okay, that sounds like a story. Like it.
I actually joined the AMA really simply because they have these toolkits,
Okay.
ready-made templates, and I felt like I could just pay the membership fee, and that was worth my time rather than trying to create something from scratch. That's
hmm
actually why I officially joined the AMA. But then I got an email from the membership chair, and they were looking for a director of acquisition and retention. And one of my personal goals was to network more. I'm a natural introvert,
hmm
and so I don't like going to networking events. But I also recognize that I'm also role based. So if I have a specific role to play, then I'm better at it. So I actually raised my hand to be the acquisitions director, which meant that I had to talk to people. Okay,
hmm
which I didn't like to
Wild.
do. Oh my
hmm
gosh, right? Um, and so that really got me out there into practicing talking to people. I didn't expect to get any business. That was not my expectation. It was really just a personal goal of mine. If
hmm
I got business out of it, then great. Um, but what ended up happening more is that of the relationships that I built along the way that got me more involved and ingrained in AMA. I
hmm
became president of the New York chapter. I was president for 2 years, one before COVID, one during COVID. I actually said yes to doing the second year before COVID hit, which
hmm
after that I was like, oh my gosh, why didn't I? Why did I do this? But then through that second year of presidency, everything went virtual, and I expanded my network of AMA chapter leaders, right? And started to do some incredible work around diversity, equity, inclusion within AMA, because one of the things that we surfaced through that was, marketing has this responsibility in furthering, inclusiveness in the
hmm
marketing discipline. And starting with that work back in 2020, it has become sort of a centerpiece of my marketing as well. It was there
hmm
before, but it wasn't something that was widely talked about. And then
hmm
after 2020, it became a conversation that we all could have. And it really shaped, I would say, the last 5 years of how I can outwardly approach, marketing,
hmm
despite, everything going on today. Um, mar- Marketing is meant to be inclusive in all different ways, right? Because we always segment our customers, we always want to personalize, we always,
hmm
want to have that connection. And how do you build that connection? It's with knowing your audience and
hmm
what you need to do to tap into them. And so, that was the unexpected twist of joining the AMA for me. But what I will say for all marketers or all people who are looking at joining and volunteering organizations is understand what you need to get out of it. You may care about the organization, and that's great, and you should care about the organization and making it better, but you should also care about yourself and lean into the things that are going to serve you, because then you will provide greater value to the organization, its members, and to yourself. So figure that out.
Yeah, I think even as we have this dialogue and sort of unpack your career a little bit, I think the AMA might have been something that helped you clarify what those things might have been. And that's why I think there's so much value in these conversations, is that it almost takes feedback from others to resonate with, like, what's unique about me, what's landing and things that I'm saying, what responses I get, because a lot of us spend, I think, especially when you're a freelancer or you're building a business or you're solo. I'm not lonely. But what are some things that people say that there's so much, sorry, there's a lot of what goes on is that you are in an echo chamber of your own mind and you don't know how what you're saying is going to be perceived. And I think having a group of people that are doing similar things to you, that are trying to add value to their own clients or just in their own skill set, trying to build a career as well, they can be that person for you to say, listen, you're thriving in this thing, you're doing well, and also be there to be your cheerleaders and encourage you to say, maybe double down on this a little bit, because this thing that you said really holds value. And that's a big part of your personal brand, and a lot of the things that I've seen about you, online, is that you are I can tell that inclusive marketing is very much your main value, your main messaging core. It's very important to you. You can tell in the way that you speak about it. It's in a lot of your copy, messaging, videos, and etc. What sort of brought that on for you, and why is that? Why is that so important to you as a marketer?
Well, personally, right, I'm a Black woman, right? So I'm part of a group
Right.
that has been traditionally excluded and in many ways silenced, despite what my accomplishments are, right? And some people may, agree with that or not agree with that, but that's my personal experience. And so being part of that group, I understand how unfair it is. I always feel like I have to do more or prove more than maybe the next person. And actually, I'm going to take this back. It's not that I feel that, I see it, right? I see it in my interactions, and I'm used to it, right? So part of that excellence that is part of who I am was out of necessity, right? And just became part of my natural, natural deliverable and abilities, right? So it's normal for me. So the standard that I operate at may be high for others, but it's here for me. And so, that's naturally unfair, and I don't want future generations to have to go through that, or I just want people to understand that these are some of the challenges that certain groups have to face. And marketing, again, is just a very important vehicle for communicating these ideas. And it's a natural vehicle to communicate these ideas. And so that's part of the reason why it's important to me. It's just simply, to me, the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's why there's so much value in having like these talks like this. So, what is that? I mean, you can go as in depth as you want, but what does that look like, or how does that manifest itself? Maybe in ways that people can actually identify. If they see, any type of discrimination or any type of thing that is just not okay, in the organization and marketing. What are some things that people can, identify with that to be able to say, maybe lend their own voice and say that needs to stop, or how can we steer this dialogue, this general consensus, in a more productive and inclusive direction?
Again, this is just using your voice and depending on which group you're in, and your privilege. And everybody has privilege. I just want to be clear about that. Everybody has a certain level of privilege I have some because of my years of experience, right? Because of my level. So I sit around with privilege as well, right? It's not just one group that has it. But it's really it's understanding that these things exist. So first accepting that these nuances exist. And then, when you recognize it, finding the appropriate way to call it out. And when I say appropriate, sometimes, you don't need to, yell it from the rooftops, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are small things. Some of the things are very obvious. I'll just use examples from
Mm-hmm.
my experiences, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, oftentimes my ideas are not what's the word I'm looking for? They're not associated with me or I can't think of the word right now. But
Mm-hmm.
someone will take my ideas and share them and they won't attribute them to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can call that out myself, which is awkward, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or someone else can do that for me. Right? I do
Mm-hmm.
that for other people. When someone talks about an idea that I know and I was privy to that they had, I can say, oh yeah, Andy talked about that the other day, right? When he brought
Mm-hmm.
up X, Y, and Z. So I'm glad that, you've thought about that and are giving that some consideration.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a small way to call that out. Or if you see someone being interrupted, or if you see someone not being given the space to use their voice, right? Create that space for them. So I try to
Mm-hmm.
model that behavior no matter the person, which
Mm-hmm.
is, hey, we haven't heard from Andy yet. You know, Andy, you have anything you'd like to share? Because you also have introverts and extroverts. Being an introvert, I know sometimes people need a little bit more time to process, and sometimes they're not very good at, say, interrupting and getting in between the loud talkers or the people with the loudest voices.
Mm-hmm.
So those are just little things that you can do. If you see something egregious, use the proper channels to bring that up. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people see something, let's say it was done to me, and then they come to me afterwards and say, "Oh, I saw that and that was terrible." Well,
Mm-hmm.
what else are you going to do about that? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's a form of allyship in terms of standing up for people. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it can just be as small as pointing something out in a very professional and strategic way, or sometimes it's a little bit larger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And I mean, the reason I ask for specific examples because it genuinely helps people to be able to identify that, whether they're in professional settings or in meetings. And I mean, full transparency, as I navigate a career and get into bigger rooms and meet people who have their stuff together, um, there's it helps to know like what not to do and also be proactive enough to say, okay, I can label these things as, unhealthy, as, causing an egregious environment. And knowing that it takes having a bit of a voice and pointing it out live, even like you just said, rather than being the Monday morning quarterback and saying, okay, like I saw that and I associate with you and, I support you, isn't always enough. Because I can even think of scenarios when I've been that person and I want to be the one that is inclusive and is on the cutting edge of the stuff. So I appreciate you calling that with examples. That was very helpful.
Yeah. And by the way, I mean, like for you, for example, you're younger than me, right? And people may think that because you're younger, you don't know as much. That's
Mm-hmm.
wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so people need to be aware of that. Maybe it's an unconscious bias, right? And call that out too. So there's so many different nuances based on our various attributes that we all have to be cognizant of because we may be missing out on an opportunity to engage or hear someone's ideas or hire someone just because of these preconceived notions. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's work that we all have to do and we're not perfect, but we have to
Mm-hmm.
try.
Awesome. Yeah. That was very helpful to unpack. I want to think sort of bigger picture in terms of your career as a whole and how it's led you to, the Karen we are now. Um, so what are some of the tactical things that you do day to day, sort of zooming back in a little bit? if you could segment your day, how much of it is sort of high level strategy? How much of it is spent in meetings? Is there any actual tactical execution? Are you writing emails, writing copy, making social posts, and doing any design? How much of it is spent on the conceptual versus the tactical sort of in your day to day?
I spend a lot of time on strategy. I feel like you have to nail your strategy and the rest comes more naturally.
Uh-huh.
So, what is your why? Who's your audience? And how do you reach them? Those are the three high level questions that I have to answer and validate on a regular basis, right? Because
Mhm.
you've made some assumptions, you've probably built some things around them, and you have to assess if those campaigns are working, if that messaging is working, and how you can massage that. The other, so that's a huge part of strategy. The second part is around the teams, right? So ensuring that the teams understand the strategy, what they're supposed to be doing, right? And how they're supposed to be delivering.
Uh-huh.
Um, the interesting part about being a fractional, right? This is why it's not just consulting, is it's the high level strategic with execution. And many times that execution in the execution bucket is team management. And team management takes up a ton of time, right? Because
Uh-huh.
you're not just leading people on what to do, you're also guiding their careers within the organization, maybe even externally as well,
Huh.
and managing their emotions or those relationships around us. There's a lot of relationship building within the organization because as we
Uh-huh.
know, people get things done and they're going to do it at their own pace and they have other priorities. And so when you develop those strong relationships and you help people see and understand the strategy and where you're trying to go in terms of the goal, you can get people to work better. And
Uh-huh.
then lastly is execution. Now, execution in marketing, in my view, is tactical and tedious work, right? But it's repeatable work, right? And
Uh-huh.
that's why you have to spend a lot of time on strategy, on the team, and having them understand so that the execution flows more evenly. Um, and you reach the goal at the end of the day better. I also often have to spend um, a decent amount of time, managing up, right? So I usually report into a CEO or a founder. They have their own overarching goals that marketing has to, plug into. So really understanding what those business goals are, connecting them to how we're going to support them on the marketing front, and really getting that understanding across the different departments, not just marketing, right? It could be product, customer service, definitely sales, right? Depending on how the organization is organized, it could filter into other areas and really creating those synergies. I find when
Uh-huh.
you have team synergy, the execution is not that difficult. I may be reading
Uh-huh.
copy, I may be creating copy, um, I may be managing agencies as well, to execute a lot of that work. I may be executing some of that stuff. I like to get my hands dirty sometimes too. So,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I'm not just a strategic person, although that's the part I love the most.
Hmm. Nice. Yeah. What can you say about getting fostering collaboration like that, especially among different niches and different skill sets? So, like for example, if you have a campaign that you are responsible for overseeing, say all of the strategies aligned, goals, we know what the KPIs are we're trying to measure, whether it's I don't know, say email signups or more sales leads, more bookings, more whatever the metric. How do you align people of different skill sets? Say you have a copywriter and a designer in a room together. What is the high level of communicating with them, the specific things of the task, specific deliverables, what you need done from them, and how do you kind of create that collaboration between two people who might have totally different experiences and skill sets and get them aligned on the main vision?
Again, it starts with that strategy. Secondly, um, I tend to get to know the individuals really well and how they work,
Mm,
and also what speaks to them so that I can say the right things to get them motivated and aligned, right? Again, this is all about people and why people are there and what what they want to accomplish just as much as what the company wants to accomplish,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, people are self-serving, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing wrong with that. You just have to understand, okay, what they
Mm-hmm.
want out of a
Oh
situation.
yeah. Yeah.
So once you understand that, you can, if you're good at this is something that I'm very good at, which is connecting the dots, right? It's this
Mm-hmm.
weird thing. I kind of see all the dots in my head and how they connect. And also understand where conflict could arise. Conflict happens all the time. It doesn't have to be bad, right? Conflict is just a difference between what two people want, right? And you have to just get them to see that there might be a difference so they could find a way to collaborate and get to the same goal. There's many different ways to do things. You know, sometimes, if I'm being honest, I get caught up in my way, right? And I have
Mm-hmm.
to check myself because I'm not the one executing the work sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even if I am, there's just a different way to do it and I can learn from that. So you get to know the individuals and their attention points and the things that motivate them, and then you try to connect that and obviously map that to the strategy. And this is how you get people to work together. And if they can't, for whatever reason, you as a leader need to navigate that and figure it out and provide very clear direction, even if that's a tough conversation, you know, around their goals, how they're being assessed, or even if there's a compromise, be like, okay, listen, we have to get this done. You only have to deal with this person for 2, 3 weeks. You can do
Mm-hmm.
this and be a
Mm-hmm.
coach and a cheerleader in that respect to get to the
Mm-hmm.
end goal.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from me from that is relationships. I mean, I think there's a general expectation that people show up and they know more or less they know their role. They know why they were brought on. They know what the goal is a lot of times. Um, it's just about execution sometimes and having someone to keep them accountable. And when I think to the projects, the client relationships, the all the all the collaborations that have been the most successful from just an objective standpoint, it's when the relationships themselves have been energizing, respectful, and just a general sense that everyone's there to support each other. And that may even be the main dialogue that we take away from the meetings. Like, obviously, we cover objectives, we're very outcome oriented, but if we're not enjoying spending time together, we're not energized, by the work that we're doing, especially these people that have different skill sets. I know that I am absolutely fascinated by working with people of, adjacent skill sets, copywriters, SEO strategists, all these people that are better than me in all these different things. And I think if we can take the approach that they are not being intimidated by, like, maybe their career success or the things that they've done, but saying, okay, how can I take away and learn from you? And a lot of people, I think, don't approach it that way. They view it as a collaboration is meant to as more of a portfolio piece and, like, what do I get out of this,
Mhm.
rather than how can I just add value to the team and learn as much as I can along the way.
But
Um,
both of those things can be true too, right? You need the portfolio piece, but you also need to add value. I see
mhm,
nothing wrong with having that personal goal, as long as it also serves the business goal. One more
mhm,
thing I want to add too is that different people have different styles of working, and you have to respect that. Some people need explicit directions, or you're never going to get what you want. And some people need to be left alone so that you can get what you want. And you
mhm,
have to understand how individuals work, provide the right amount of information. Sometimes the right amount of information for 90% of the people is 10% of the people need so much more, right?
mhm. Yeah.
And just provide all of that for everyone. Even if it's just one person that needs much more information, give it to everybody because you're going to create it anyway, right?
Mhm,
And understand those different working styles, right?
mhm,
The hands-on versus the hands-off is a huge one, right?
mhm,
But also some people need a little bit more coaching. Some people you need to be on the phone. They need the audio and the visual. I'm an audio and visual person. right? If you just tell me something, it's probably going in one ear and out the other. If you give me some visual aids with it, then it's probably going to stick a little bit more. And I'll ask for
Yeah.
those things. I'll be like, okay, well,
Mhm.
you just told me all that. Can you send me a document? It's not to make more work for you. It's to make it easier for you later to get what you
Mhm.
want, you know?
Yeah.
So that's also a very important aspect. You have to know your people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's one of my biggest takeaways from this conversation is people are kind of at the center of it, and how we communicate with each other is really what's going to determine not just the working relationship, but also just, I mean, your experience of life as a whole. Like if I get to the end of my day, the things that stick out to me are the conversations I had, the people that I met, their responses to maybe the work I presented, and there's always people involved at some stage of that, rather than the very tactical things that I did, whether it was the in the weeds work, the emails you sent. The things that stick with people are the conversations, the relationships that go into what we do. And I view you kind of from the outside as someone that's very good at setting the conditions for success, in those relationships. So,
I try.
um, you do a good job. So kind of landing the plane on this. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some of the projects you have going on, anything that excites you, company wise, K Media. What's got you excited for this week and ongoing? We're just hit quarter two. What are the things that have you excited to get out of bed in the morning?
Well, I am working on a brand refresh for K Media, and just a refresh, reset. Been doing this for a long time, and I'm just exploring new opportunities, new ways of being, which is really interesting.
Okay.
I started a sub brand last year called Colossal Work, which was really centered on equity, the equity lens. And I did some work actually through the AMA, some research reports. And one of the things I want to do through that initiative is uh, create solutions, like tech-based solutions that help solve some of the problems
Okay.
that surfaced when I did this research with CMOs across the country.
Hmm.
And so I'm working on that, kind of putting
Okay.
some plans together for that. I'm working on my brand refresh, which is, just really um just retooling a little bit of what I've done in the past, right? Just
Hmm.
brightening it up.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Dude,
and
you're talking to a designer here. I know all about getting in the weeds on that stuff. So
there you
yeah,
go,
you're
right?
among friends. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
I'm excited about that. You always want to just kind of take a look at all the things that you've been doing for the past few years and see how you can make things better. I have a personal mission, which is just to be better than before, and that kind of extends into, again, my company and my interactions with people through my
Hmm.
volunteer work, through, my paid work, and just me just trying to be a better human. And so I've centered that belief, and I really want everything that I do to reflect that. So it's actually a really fun time for me
Hmm.
as we, venture into spring. And I'm looking forward to how that works with clients, how that I engage
Hmm.
clients a little bit differently, and maybe even get some new ones that were not non-traditional in my
Hmm.
past as well.
Hmm. That seems a fit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think just in the conversations we've had, you don't you strike this balance of, because like even in my shoes, like sometimes I get nervous to approach someone that's very established professional. I mean, like AMA, professional chapters council. Like you do a very good job of maintaining the approachability and also the excitement around your work. Whereas I feel like sometimes people in that feel the pressure to sort of maintain these professional titles, organization, relationships, they kind of do that at the expense, maybe sometimes, not on their own fault, of, having to maintain a certain look. So I think just hearing you talk about some of your projects, the things that you're involved in, you're approaching it in a very holistic, positive way. Whereas I fall into the trap too of like these are tasks and things that I have to get done, which I think, and this is a whole nother rabbit hole of a conversation, but how you approach work in general is just it has to be I get to do rather than I have to. Um,
Mhm.
and that's just take away from as we're building MMG and, serving the clients that we do, is that it's not always the fun, exciting dream work once you get into it, but you'll realize that how you approach the work and the thoughts you have about it outside of it really are everything. So that's a big takeaway from this chat. But I want to thank you for coming on the show. Where can people go to learn more about you, K Media, Colossal Work, all these fun projects you have going on?
Just go to LinkedIn, right? All my links are there. I'm on it quite often, working on being on it even more. So just follow me on LinkedIn, subscribe. I start a new newsletter, Better on Purpose, for the link for LinkedIn. So just find me there. And thank you for having me, Andy. This was such a great chat.